Hello and welcome to the Capital Conversation with me, Michael Hayman. Now, today we're getting social with an author, podcaster and business leader who works with a company that defines our times. Along the way, he's been described as a fantasy hire, opinionated and to the point, and well suited to run a noisy upstart firm. Now, let me tell you, that firm makes a lot of noise for a living because it's Twitter, and its European Vice President, Bruce Daisley, joins me here today. Bruce, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Nice to have you on the show. Now, I was reading an Evening Standard piece that said, like television in the 50s, Twitter is rewriting the rule book for how politicians, celebrities and businessmen communicate. Does that capture the contribution of Twitter to our lives, or is there more to it?
Yeah, you know, I think very strongly the next generation of politicians will have to handle all aspects of social media, and that extends beyond Twitter, but it's a really important part of delivering your message. Often it enhances the message that comes through the main media, but yeah, it's a vital tool.
Do you think we get it as a society, the power of Twitter? Because when you think about how quickly news travels, how it breaks.
I wonder if everyone gets it, except the people commentating on it. You know, people who are so captivated with, you know, Barack Obama remains one of the top 10 people on social media. For me, the most exciting person in politics right now is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in the US, who's the new House of the House.
Absolutely.
And
uses it brilliantly.
And despite the constant flack she's getting, she's out there all the time doing live videos, posting stuff. I think she's a compelling illustration of how emphatically people get.
Well, just staying that side of the channel for a minute, or that side of the pond for a minute, what do you make of the president's use of Twitter? He's a big fan of your firm.
Yeah, I suspect he's more than a little bit upset that Barack Obama still has twice as many followers as him. So, look, you know, I think he's been incredibly compelling. We can't pick and choose whether we admire someone's tactics from whether we admire their politics. You know, I think Barack Obama was credited very widely in 2008 with bringing in a lot of new donors, and Donald Trump has taken the ability to sort of disintermediate, to take his message directly over the heads of the news media to an audience. He's a compelling politician.
Who are the British political stars on Twitter, do you think?
I've always thought that Nicola Sturgeon is very powerful. For me, David Lammy is one of the standout stars of Brexit, simply because he's been using social media, Twitter in particular, very effectively to get his message across.
And is that just as much as I've made a good speech and I'm now sticking it out, or are there techniques that you admire in the way that content's shared?
Yeah, I think the stuff that works is the stuff that feels heartfelt and honest. And so I saw a brilliant thing that Nicola Sturgeon did about 3 weeks ago, where she gave, warts and all, a clear description why she was a Remain politician. And she probably tackled some of the stuff that people, when they're trying to live in a soundbite era, don't want to do. So sort of a pushback at the idea that this in any way trivialises politics or makes it into like snappy little headlines. In fact, I think the people who were over time, you know, Boris Johnson's not effectively good on social media. If it was all about landing a killer quip, then I think it would be his medium.
Yeah.
I think actually increasingly social media is allowing people to be revealed as much as.
So we need to see meaning.
Yeah,
and that's the key, is it?
When we see something that's heartfelt, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, when we see something that's heartfelt, that seems like it's not through a filter, I think we increasingly say, actually, I'm drawn to that. And, you know, for warts or for all, I think, you know, the politicians who are really standing out are the ones who are doing that.
Well, let's leave them alone. Let's go back to Twitter as a business. I mean, you're leading it here in Europe. I mean, I'm so interested. It's one of the great brands of our time. Huge valuation, $22.4 billion, but still questions about Twitter as a business. We get it as a service, but as a sort of as a business of the future, give us a sense of what it's like the other side of this. I mean, is there a grand plan, a grand vision that we're about to see?
Gosh, well, like we started making a profit last year, so I thought we'd put those quips behind us. I think, you know, increasingly, I think a lot of people are saying there's an evolution of the way we use the apps on our phone. And I think you might recognise this, that, you know, when we open certain apps on our phone, you tap that icon for a particular reason. It's a bit like, you know, you'd go into certain high street stores. This one's for cosmetics, this one's for music, this one's for books. And we tap the app on our phone. And I think increasingly it's pretty clear to people that there's a lot of apps that are about your friends, or a lot of apps are about photographs of what happened at the weekend. And Twitter's the app that you open when you want to know what's going on in the world.
So that's its key purpose, is it? To break news. What's happening?
You
right.
know, I think that's a really interesting challenge as well. I saw an analysis of Yahoo's business, and you know, it was in a book about Yahoo, and there was an interesting challenge where someone was the former CEO Carol Bartz had invited people to say what Yahoo was famous for, and of course, in comparison to the reductive simplicity of the descriptions for Google or eBay or Amazon, it had seemed less clear. And I think we've gone through that process in the last couple of years. What's Twitter for? It's for news, or it's for what's happening.
But a particular type of news is my news, it's partial news. I mean, do you worry ever about the issue of bias, the issue of how straight the actual information is that we're actually receiving?
So the interesting thing actually is, well, firstly, Twitter's the news that's relevant for you. You might just be interested in Manchester United, and so you can very easily get a timeline that's just about your obsession. The second thing to say is that we've actually worked very hard to try and add plurality to debate, to ensure that we're getting, if you search a hashtag, you won't just get one side, you'll get both sides of the argument. We've tried to, we use the word inject, we've injected different tweets into your timeline. So if someone you know has liked something, we try and put that in your timeline to try and break you out of a filter bubble.
Okay, so you're trying to address that.
I have to say that if you search for what people comment on, they often say, I don't want other voices added to my timeline.
What's the most searched for stuff on Twitter, do you think? What's the data show you?
Look, you know, Twitter's the biggest thing in town when it comes to sport. Sport just is incredible. It adds to your enjoyment, you know, whether it was watching the World Cup, whether it's the joy of the Olympics. For me, I'm a tennis fan, so sharing the moment
Andy Murray's hip.
Watching the Australian Open at 4 in the morning and feeling like you're not on your own is a quite joyful experience, actually.
But on this issue about the performance of the company, when you look at things like users, its share price, its things like that, there is, despite all of the the very notable successes, the contributions, there continues to be the doubters about the long-term place of Twitter among that kind of like all-star lineup of tech stocks. What do you say to your detractors?
I'm very surprised with the tone of that. If you'd have asked me that a year ago, I'd have said I'd have had a rehearsed answer that would have tried to push back on that. But far from it, I think the business is in pretty robust health. I think increasingly people are saying, there's a real difference between what Twitter's doing and what other people are doing.
But the tone is only based on the facts of, the share price is volatile at
3 times what it was last year.
But still, a lot of the pundits, they do question that point. You've talked a lot about users that have come off the platform. I mean, I take the point about the future confidence that you might have, but in terms of those people that are looking for that kind of front line of businesses, the Googles, the others, I mean, do you think you're going to take your place amongst that sort of rank of company in the future?
It's not even a consideration. I think what we're trying to do is to try and build a business that's enduring. So, to contextualise what you're saying, to sort of to take your pushbacks. I think about 18 months ago, 2 years ago, you'd have been fair and completely right to say, there's questions in what you're trying to do. I think increasingly people are saying, OK, Twitter spent a lot of time dealing with probably there's some of the downsides of the platform.
The trolling.
Yeah, we've spent a long time making sure that we've moved a long way from the worst aspects of human behaviour, but
you said,
through Twitter.
Your own words, you said you'll never fully win on these things. I mean, do you think you can win? I mean, should we have hope as parents, as people that want to see, decent, honest information online. I mean, is that a realistic expectation?
Yeah, for me, you know, a reminder of where we are as a society, when you see news reports of what's going on College Green in Westminster, and you see barracking of MPs, and even though we all want to celebrate debate in public, there's moments when that debate down at College Green feels like it's gone a touch too far. It feels like we're jeopardising some of the people whose voice we should defend. And I think, you know, when you then imagine the internet, all the internet does is reflect those things. So our job is to try and ensure that that debate on College Green is healthy and fair and
I suppose this comes down to your sort of always rejection that you're not a publisher, that you're just reflecting views and opinions. But do you ever sort of feel that when you see some of the fake news, you know in your heart of hearts that it's not right, it's not true? Is there ever a kind of, you know, internally an issue about we should be correcting this, we should be putting it right?
But I think, you know, the fascinating thing about Twitter is it's full of enthusiasts. You know, it's got several thousand people who work there, and most of those people are first and foremost driven for a sense of passion about what the app and the platform can achieve. And so every single one of them feels very, very passionately that we need to use this platform for good. And that's why we get so, you know, it's spellbinding when you see someone using the platform to raise money for a charity or to shine a light on something that's a passion project.
Right, now listen, we're going to have to leave it there because I'm going to come back and ask you about your boss, Jack Dorsey, in a minute. But until that, we're going to have to go to the breaks. But we will come back from tweets to tales of how to make it at work as we discuss Bruce's new book. We'll be back in just a minute. See you then. Welcome back. Now, you're watching The Capital Conversation with me, Michael Hayman. Now, Bruce, we spoke a little bit earlier about your role as VP at Twitter and Twitter, the brand. Now, I want to get to the book, but before we do, just, you know, the chance to talk about your boss. He's one of the great legend of tech. I mean, what's he like to work with, the day job, Jack Dorsey? What's he like?
Thoughtful, intelligent, gentle, honest. I think, you know, all of those things immediately spring to mind.
Does he do your review meetings?
You know, he's very available. He answers emails from me. He has conversations with me, anyone in the company.
Did he inspire you? I mean, well, let's move on to the book. I mean, did the Twitter experience inspire your new book, The Joy of Work, at all, in terms of the culture that you work in?
Yeah, so look, you know, what happened was I was very fortunate. I've worked at Twitter for a while, and when I first started there, for the first few years, people used to say, wow, the London office has just got this incredible dynamic culture. It just feels like it's a buzzing place, and that was people inside the company, outside the company. I made the mistake, therefore, of thinking that in some way I had the secret formula for magic on culture. And it was only as time went on and maybe things got a little bit harder, it became clear to me that I didn't have that source. So I started looking for evidence and inspiration. And what I found was there's no shortage of people who've done scientific explorations into work, but most of the evidence debunks what we do on a 9-to-5 basis. So it felt like this sort of revelation for me that, you know, I was sitting there and at times responsible for people being unhappy at work. And I thought, you know,
why was that? What was that?
Yeah, I think, you know, the way we've orchestrated modern work is at the expense of making progress in anything. You know, most of us sit in an open plan environment where there's constant interruptions.
And you're not a fan, are you?
The average British person has 16 hours a week of meetings. And so, you know, it's at the expense of getting anything done.
Right.
So most people, if you say, "Did you have a good day at work?" it's when they made progress in something meaningful.
Right. I mean, it's been described as a manifesto for frustrated workers. I mean, is the frustrated worker is that the norm in I guess UK society, global society, as you experience it?
Yeah, I was reading something this morning that said that 58% of British workers feel like they don't enjoy their jobs. And, you know, the Gallup Workforce Survey, which is probably the main source on this, says that 8% of British workers are engaged with their jobs. So the numbers are really stark.
Is that the heart of the productivity issue, do you think?
Very probably, you know, very probably. People just don't feel like they're given the autonomy to get on with their jobs and feel like they're struggling in the open plan environments, all those meetings, they're struggling to get anything done.
I mean, obviously you've been taking Twitter to heart because there's some fantastic sloganing in the book. Work is the lie we tell ourselves. Tell us more.
Yeah, because, you know, we very often, we try and we come out of meetings and people say, what was the meeting like? Good meeting. It was a good meeting. None of us want to confess that, you know, we're having a difficult time at work. And the challenge of modern work is that, you know, there was a day when people got that job offer. They were elated. They skipped their way on the way home. They were delighted. And yet most of us find ourselves a couple of years on feeling like we don't enjoy our jobs. You know, one of the saddest things is that over half of all workers say they feel lonely at work. And, you know, of those, the majority of them say they don't have a single friend at work.
And when you look at the root causes of that, is it just the environment, or are there issues about the way we as people approach the workplace?
I think, unfortunately, we've taken too much of a lead from people like Elon Musk in the idea that work is an ever-expanding thing that we can expand to fill whatever amount of time you want. And what you find when you look at the evidence, so one of the things that we've all done, we all took emails onto our mobile phones, and it felt like a good thing to do. And the consequence of that is the average working day has gone up by at least 2 hours a day. In fact, the suggestion is in the US, people who are expected to be online are doing about a 70-hour week. What you find is that's at the expense of them feeling burnt out, exhausted and uncreative.
And do you ever feel that there's a tension there between being a technology leader and yet being the first to admit that perhaps tech is not freeing us but actually making life a good deal more difficult because of the reasons you explain?
I think probably the critical thing of anyone who looks into technology, and this whole heap of books that have come out this year, is intentionality. Decide why you're using anything. For me, I have to say, first and foremost, as a user, and the reason why I love working there, is Twitter makes me laugh every day. So, you know, for me, I open the app, not with any sense of sort of burden or duty. I open the app because it makes me smile.
I mean, you mentioned in the book that humour and fun are really important parts of actually more productive sort of places. I mean,
this was the revelation for me, because
for those that say it's frivolous, it's serious, what's the rebuttal?
Well, look, the first thing is that, you know, if you look at people who say they're engaged in their job, then by the smallest possible measure, it appears they're 20% more productive. But when you look at how they can be engaged, a lot of people find themselves on workplaces, work floors now, where people aren't chatting, they've maybe got headphones on, they're struggling to get things done. And what you find, probably the best stat I saw, was someone took the same technology that you might use to track a Premiership football game or a tennis match. He said, let's track what goes on in an office. So fascinating. We've never thought about trying to see what happens in an office. Here's what they found. Email contributed about 2% to what happens productivity-wise in an office. Meetings account for 2%. The big goal scorer, the big winner, was face-to-face chat. People wandering the floor, unencumbered by meetings, unencumbered by a burden of having to answer emails. People wandering the floor and saying, I'm thinking about this.
So collaboration.
Conversation comes from face-to-face chat. And unfortunately, we've engineered work so it kills face-to-face chat.
How far off the pace are British bosses in understanding that issue?
The good thing for me is the reason why I feel this book hopefully is pushing at an open door is because I think it's a troublemaker's manifesto. This book's not for bosses. This is for someone who joined a company.
I'm going to speak at the CBI on it then in their annual convention.
They joined a company and they were inspired by what they could do there, and then very quickly realised there were a whole heap of rules, and they thought, you know what, if I take my boss a bit of evidence, I think we can change this. And so it's a troublemaker's manifesto.
Troublemaker's manifesto. Now, talking of troublemakers, you've got your own very highly rated podcast, Eat, Sleep, Work, Repeat. Do you find, you know, your stretch, author, tech leader, podcaster, do they all sort of marry up in a way, or are you consistently working to deliver it all?
I do my podcast at the weekend, so I tend to find that the stimulation I get personally from chatting to a psychologist, or, you know, I was honoured to chat to the world's best architect, a guy called Bjarke Ingels. If you're going to speak to the world's best architect, you want to make sure that you spent 3 weeks researching architecture. And I just love the stimulation that provides, really.
And do you think that's a sort of, I mean, it's interesting, I mean, happiness at work, I mean, is that about having multi and varied interests, do you think, in terms of what makes people content about the way they spend their time productively?
There's a fascinating bit of work by a guy called Jack Pansep, and he studied the brains of rats, and what he found was there was a real sheer delight. There was sort of a stimulus in the brain from seeking stuff, from the joy of exploring. In fact, he found the trigger of that in rats' brains, and he found that rats were so addicted to the hormonal hit that they couldn't get their hands off the trigger once he was activating it. And so there's something in learning new things. When we can activate that in our jobs, it seems to make our jobs really, really rewarding.
Now, I mean, I'm sorry about moving from rats to Google, but I mean, you know, you've worked at Google, you've worked at YouTube, you've worked at Twitter. I mean, when you look at those as workplaces in terms of places that inspire, you know, people to go further, do more, are there any common denominators in terms of them as cultures and places to grow?
I was honoured to work at Google and YouTube. You know, what a joy to work at some of the most beloved brands in the world. I was truly honoured. For me, the reason why I adore my job at Twitter is that I've got a massive amount of autonomy, but hopefully everyone who works alongside me would say exactly the same. And we laugh every day.
You got the autonomy, you laugh. Now, we're almost out. I'm going to give you your last thing. I'm going to ask you to sum yourself up in a tweet. Give us something to tweet about.
Tired-looking Brummie.
Tired-looking Brummie. Well, I think that's a bit of a downbeat way to end it. But Bruce, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Tell us about your book. Fascinating career. Good to have you with us. Now, that's all we have time for. And thanks to my guest, Bruce Daisley, whose story has taken us from the world of tech to a clarion call for more fun in the workplace. Talk about trending, positivity, optimism, and a can-do spirit. Tweet that. I'll see you next time on The Capital Conversation.